So what if I told you that enslaved Africans who were brought to America came here with skills in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and that is the reason why they were chosen for enslavement? So peace, family. So this video is inspired by two stories. Well, one video and one story that I saw this week. The video was a video posted by Home Team History again, where he asked the question, why were Africans chosen for enslavement over others? And the story that inspired this video was an article about Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who is trying to put forward a curriculum that will teach children that slaves benefited from slavery somehow. So I just want to read some excerpts from the article. So it says, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said on Friday that new education standards around teaching slavery in Florida schools will show that enslaved people were able to parlay the skills they were forced to learn. The skills they were forced to learn. Wow. So right away, the implication is that any skills that the enslaved Africans had in the Americas, they were forced to learn those skills being enslaved. DeSantis, who was speaking to reporters during an event in Utah, defended a new set of academic standards in his state that will require middle schools to teach that enslaved people develop skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit, a line that has ignited significant controversy among the teachers groups and parents in the state. DeSantis said they are probably going to show that some of the folks that eventually parlayed, being a blacksmith into doing things later in life, adding that scholars put together the standards, which he said were rooted in whatever is factual. All right, family. So let's talk about what's factual, right? The fact of the matter is, and unfortunately, this is not frequently talked about when it comes to our enslaved ancestors, and it's not depicted in any movies when it comes to our enslaved ancestors. But the fact of the matter, the reality of the matter is that many of the enslaved Africans, when they were brought here from Africa to the Americas, they had skills in STEM in Africa, and they were brought onto the ships with the skills. They were brought onto the ships already with knowledge of those skills, right? So let me just read a quick article. This is from encyclopedia.com. Those slaves in the Americas are typically portrayed as either field hands or domestic servants. Many slaves were in fact skilled laborers whose crafts were a vital part of the American economy, particularly in the antebellum South. There is ample evidence for skilled African and African American slave labor, including the manifests of slave ships, which identify artisans such as wood carvers and metal workers. So on the manifest of slave ships, meaning they had the skills of metallurgy and wood carving and other skills, as we'll talk about, they had those skills before they even set foot on the slave ship. They had already acquired those skills in Africa. Records of the sale from the early years of the slave trade through the mid-19th century indicate a higher price for skilled individuals. So if you had skills in metallurgy, agriculture, weaving, carpentry, woodworking, right, then when those individuals were sold in the slave trade, they were sold at a higher price point. So enslaved Africans with skills in STEM actually yielded the slave traders more income. Next paragraph. Now check this out. Skilled slaves arrived with the knowledge of a wide range of traditional African crafts, pottery making, weaving, basketry, wood carving, metalworking, and building that would provide valuable in the Americas, particularly during the pre-industrial colonial period when common household goods such as thread, fabric, and soap were all made by hand. The key word there is skilled slaves arrived with the knowledge, meaning those skills in STEM that our enslaved African ancestors had, they did not acquire them through slavery. They had those skills prior to being captured, prior to being sold into slavery. Colonial labor shortages and a general scarcity of goods intensified the need for skilled slave labor. Some planters required slaves with specific skills and were willing to pay slave traders a premium for them. Rice planters in the coastal low country of South Carolina and Georgia, for example, were willing to pay more for slaves from Africa's windward coast, present-day Senegal to Cote d'Ivoire, as individuals were skilled in rice cultivation and processing. Their skills included the ability to weave winnowing baskets and carve wooden mortars and pestles for the processing of grains of rice. Now, doing research into my own personal ancestry and DNA, my paternal DNA goes back to the Balanta of Guinea-Bissau. I think I shared in previous videos where there's a book entitled Planting Rice and Harvesting Slaves that talks about how the Belanta of Guinea-Bissau were master agriculturalists, right? And they were very skilled at growing rice. Again, Guinea-Bissau is part of that Senegambia region, where this article talks about specifically European slave traders went looking for the African master agriculturalists who were able to grow the rice crop. And might I add you, if you've ever taken a trip to Africa, right, you notice how that soil in West Africa that you find in the Senegambia region all the way down to Ghana and Nigeria, that red clay that they have in West Africa is the same red clay dirt that we have down here in Georgia, in South Carolina, North Carolina. That same red clay, the soil is almost the same, right? So if our African ancestors were master agriculturalists at growing crops in that soil in West Africa, then that means they would have been highly sought after by European slave traders who were trying to establish an industry here in America. They needed those master agriculturalists. They needed our ancestors' skills in STEM that we had already acquired. They needed them specifically in order to grow crops here in the Americas. So to answer the question, why were Africans chosen? Without question, Africans were chosen because of their skills in STEM, because of their master agricultural abilities, because of their skills as blacksmiths, as carpenters, as metal workers, as builders, as masons, as basket weavers, as pottery makers, as textile makers. Next paragraph. During the colonial period, traditional African skills were preserved in some measure despite the trauma of displacement, largely because of the practical need for handcrafted items. As the plantation economy grew, so did the need for skilled slave labor. Most plantations had facilities for spinning thread and weaving fabric, as well as blacksmithing, coopering, which is barrel making, and carpentry. The list of slaves at Mount Vernon in 1799, the year of George Washington's death, revealed that of the 184 slaves listed, more than 1/4 were described as skilled workers, including carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmiths, coopers, millers, distillers, spinners, weavers, and seamstresses. At Thomas Jefferson's plantation at Poplar Forest in Virginia, slaves performed tasks that included brick making, blacksmithing, woodworking, and masonry. So we always hear about house slaves, we always hear about field slaves, but we never hear, nor do we see depicted in TV and in the movies, of the skilled laborers, the enslaved Africans who were skilled laborers. Typically, such skilled laborers provided goods for use on the plantation, though in many cases they became profitable enterprises in their own right, providing an additional resource of income for the slaveholder who sold the products made by the slave artisans. Robert Fogel and Stanley Ingerman in Time on the Cross, The Economics of the American Negro Slavery, have asserted that more than 25% of American slaves were craftsmen and semi-skilled workers. They suggest as well that many of the leaders of the slave community came from this class of skilled workers, that many became leaders of protests, insurrections, and desertions. Textile production was a typical plantation enterprise. Female slaves, following their work in the fields or in the slaveholder's household, were often required to spin, weave, or sew at night, usually to fill specific production quotas. The textiles produced by the slaves included cotton, linen, and wool fabrics, as well as embroidered bed coverlets and pieces of quilt, often made under the supervision of the mistress of the plantation. Sale of the textiles often became a successful business that helped offset fluctuations in the planter's income from crops. Another area of production of goods by slaves occurred as a part of artisanal trades. Throughout the colonies in the South as well as in the North, a system of apprenticing and hiring out skilled slaves to white and free black craftsmen was a significant part of the production of both utilitarian and decorative items, including furniture, wrought iron, grill work, and jewelry. This system of labor resulted in a higher level of development of skills among enslaved craftspeople while enriching slaveholders. So this is an important point, meaning that the skills in STEM that our enslaved African ancestors had when they came over from Africa, we would then teach those skills to other non-skilled enslaved individuals, which resulted in a higher level of development of skills amongst the enslaved craftspeople, as is stated here. So our enslaved ancestors who did not have skills, when they did acquire them, they acquired them from other skilled enslaved Africans. Slaves were apprenticed to cabinet makers, silversmiths, goldsmiths, printers, and engravers. There was economic benefit for the master craftsmen as well as for the slaveholders. Unlike indentured free apprentices, slaves were not released after finishing their apprenticeship, but continued to labor with a higher level of skill, yet at the same low rate of pay. Some slaves benefited as well. Some were able to purchase their freedom, and others ran away, confident of their ability to earn a living. In the early 1800s, in New Orleans, free black artisans and slave apprentices dominated the production of certain fine craft items, such as furniture. Female slaves were often trained as seamstresses and dressmakers, and their services were hired out as yet another source of income for the slaveholder. Newspaper advertisements indicate that many of these women who had highly marketable skills fled. Others, such as Elizabeth Hobbs Keckley, were able to purchase their own freedom by sewing. So all of this is just to say that, one, our African ancestors who were enslaved here in the Americas, they already had skills in STEM prior to enslavement. They acquired those skills in Africa, and they brought those skills with them in their mind on the slave ships, and they continued to practice their craft while enslaved. They taught other enslaved Africans who may not have been skilled, and that's how other non-skilled enslaved African ancestors were able to acquire skills. And it were these skills in STEM that our enslaved African ancestors had, which made them prime targets by European slave traders to be brought here to the New World to help build up this fledgling nation. So it is a point of fact without any hyperbole that our enslaved African ancestors did in fact build this country with the skills in science, technology, engineering, and math that they acquired in Africa prior to enslavement. All right. Peace.